Rome did not collapse in a single night. It did not fall in one dramatic battle beneath burning skies. The greatest empire of the ancient world did not vanish because a single enemy proved stronger. For centuries, Rome dominated continents, commanded unmatched legions, engineered roads and aqueducts that outlived generations, and built a legal system that still shapes modern civilization. It survived civil wars, political conspiracies, economic crises, and relentless invasions. It adapted, expanded, and endured. From the outside, Rome appeared invincible. It was not merely a state, it was an idea of permanence. And yet, it fell. The question has echoed for centuries: who destroyed Rome? Was it the barbarian tribes crossing weakened borders? Was it political instability? Was it economic collapse? Was it moral decline? Historians have debated endlessly, but perhaps the deeper truth lies not in a single cause, but in a confrontation. A confrontation between two forces that lived inside the empire itself. Rome versus Rome. Strength versus stagnation. Discipline versus luxury. Expansion versus overextension. At its height, Rome believed in its own inevitability. It saw itself as eternal. Its citizens grew up under the shadow of imperial greatness. Its armies marched with confidence born from repeated victory. Its rulers governed with the assumption that power, once achieved, would sustain itself. But power carries a paradox. The stronger a system becomes, the harder it is to imagine its limits. Success can breed complacency. Expansion can create fragility. Wealth can weaken discipline. Stability can mask decay. Rome did not wake up one day and decide to collapse. It adjusted slowly. Small compromises accumulated. Political loyalty shifted from republic to emperors. Military service transformed from civic duty into paid profession. Public virtue gradually gave way to spectacle and distraction. None of these changes seemed catastrophic in isolation. Each felt manageable. Each felt temporary. Yet together, they altered the internal structure of the empire. This is the story not of invasion alone, but of internal tension. Not of a single fatal blow, but of a gradual imbalance between power and resilience. Because empires rarely fall at their weakest moment. They fall when they can no longer recognize their own weakening. Rome did not simply face enemies at its borders, it faced erosion within its foundations. To understand the fall of Rome is not merely to study ancient history. It is to examine a timeless pattern. What happens when expansion outpaces stability? What happens when comfort replaces discipline? What happens when institutions grow larger than the values that once sustained them? Rome's collapse forces us to confront a deeper question: can a superpower destroy itself without realizing it? This is not just a tale of barbarian invasions or political assassinations. It is a confrontation between greatness and decay. Between the visible strength of an empire and the invisible weaknesses accumulating beneath it. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this: Rome was not defeated by its enemies alone. It was undone by the slow conflict between its own power and its own transformation. At the heart of Rome's rise stood one defining force: conquest. The early Roman Republic was built on disciplined expansion, strategic warfare, and relentless ambition. Roman legions were not merely armies, they were instruments of organization, endurance, and calculated aggression. They moved with precision. They built roads as they marched. They fortified positions with engineering brilliance. Every victory strengthened the Republic's economy, prestige, and influence. Conquest was not chaos. It was systematized expansion. Rome did not grow accidentally. It absorbed territories deliberately. Each annexed region became part of a broader administrative structure. Law followed the sword. Infrastructure followed the law. Trade routes expanded. Taxes flowed toward the center. The Mediterranean slowly transformed into what Romans proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Expansion fed confidence. Confidence fed identity. Rome was not just growing, it was becoming inevitable. But conquest carries a hidden cost. As territories multiplied, so did complexity. Governing distant provinces required bureaucratic expansion. Communication slowed across vast distances. Corruption flourished in regions far from central oversight. Military presence had to be permanent, not temporary. Borders stretched thin across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Defense became as demanding as conquest once was. The energy that once fueled expansion now diverted toward maintenance. The paradox of imperial growth is simple: expansion increases power outward while straining stability inward. Each new border required additional legions. Each additional legion required funding. Each campaign required loyalty and discipline that could not be sustained indefinitely. What began as strategic advantage gradually transformed into logistical burden. Over time, Rome's victories became obligations. Provinces needed protection from rebellion and invasion. Local unrest required intervention. Political leaders competed for military glory, sometimes dragging the state into unnecessary conflicts to maintain prestige. Expansion was no longer purely defensive or strategic, it became psychological. Rome had grown accustomed to victory. To stop expanding felt like weakness. And when an empire equates growth with survival, it struggles to recognize limits. Overexpansion also reshaped the Roman army. In earlier centuries, soldiers fought as citizens defending their homeland. Their loyalty was civic and personal. But as campaigns grew distant and continuous, military service evolved. Generals gained personal influence over troops. Allegiance shifted from republic to commander. Civil wars erupted not because Rome was weak, but because it had become too large and too powerful for its own political structure. The very roads that once enabled swift conquest now carried threats across weakened frontiers. The very wealth that poured into Rome fueled luxury and dependency. The very territories that symbolized dominance demanded constant defense. The empire that once thrived on motion became trapped by its own scale. This is the critical tension: conquest created Rome's strength, but overexpansion created Rome's fragility. What once energized the Republic eventually exhausted it. Expansion without recalibration transforms triumph into vulnerability. Power, when stretched too far, becomes weight. Rome did not collapse simply because enemies attacked. It struggled because its reach exceeded its capacity for sustainable cohesion. The drive to conquer had built an empire unmatched in scale. But the inability to define limits left that empire structurally strained. In the end, the spirit of conquest that once made Rome unstoppable became part of the mechanism that made it unstable. Growth without balance is not resilience. It is acceleration toward strain. In its earliest centuries, Rome was not wealthy. It was not adorned in marble palaces or flooded with foreign gold. It was defined by discipline. Roman identity was forged in hardship, restraint, and civic responsibility. Citizens were soldiers. Service was duty, not profession. Honor was not displayed in excess but proven through endurance. The Republic valued austerity, order, and sacrifice. Political authority rotated. Power was balanced through institutions. The system rewarded resilience rather than indulgence. Discipline was not merely military, it was cultural. Roman virtues such as gravitas, pietas, and virtus reflected seriousness, loyalty, and courage. Public life demanded accountability. Personal ambition was restrained by expectation of service. The Republic survived not because it was rich, but because it was structured around shared responsibility. Stability emerged from self-control. But success transformed Rome. As conquest expanded territory, wealth poured into the capital. Precious metals, slaves, exotic goods, and tribute from provinces flooded Roman markets. Marble replaced stone. Villas replaced modest homes. Entertainment expanded in scale and spectacle. Luxury, once rare, became normal for the elite. Comfort slowly replaced austerity as the standard of living in the capital. With wealth came a shift in values. Political office increasingly became a path to personal enrichment rather than public service. Competition for power intensified. Patronage networks deepened. Loyalty moved from state to individual benefactors. The republic's moral backbone began to bend under the weight of ambition. The concept of bread and circuses emerged as a stabilizing mechanism. Public entertainment, gladiator games, chariot races, massive spectacles, distracted the population. Grain distributions ensured basic needs were met. Comfort replaced civic engagement. The population became spectators rather than participants. As long as food was available and entertainment continued, unrest remained contained. Comfort alters psychology. When survival is guaranteed and luxury becomes accessible, urgency diminishes. Citizens become less invested in structural integrity and more invested in personal security. Military service becomes less attractive compared to private wealth. The disciplined citizen soldier gradually gives way to professional armies. Civic virtue transitions into consumer expectation. The danger of comfort is not immediate collapse. It is slow erosion. Discipline requires constant renewal. Luxury requires constant supply. Once a society adjusts to high levels of comfort, reducing them becomes politically dangerous. Leaders hesitate to impose austerity. Reform becomes unpopular. Stability becomes tied to maintaining indulgence rather than maintaining strength. At the same time, inequality widens. Elites accumulate enormous wealth while lower classes rely on state distributions. Dependency deepens. Public life shifts from participation to consumption. The Republic's original spirit of shared sacrifice weakens. Rome's external power remained formidable, but internally the culture that once sustained it had shifted. It is not that luxury alone destroys empires. Wealth can strengthen a state if paired with discipline. The problem arises when comfort replaces responsibility. When citizens no longer see themselves as guardians of the system, but as beneficiaries of it. When the expectation becomes receiving rather than sustaining. Rome's transformation from disciplined republic to indulgent imperial capital did not occur overnight. It unfolded across generations. Each generation inherited greater wealth and weaker urgency. The memory of hardship faded. The expectation of permanence grew. And with that expectation came complacency. In the confrontation between discipline and luxury, discipline builds strength slowly and quietly. Luxury consumes it gradually and invisibly. Rome's power did not vanish the moment marble palaces were built. But the psychological shift from restraint to indulgence altered the internal balance of the empire. The tragedy is subtle. The same success that created prosperity undermined the cultural conditions that had made prosperity possible. One of Rome's greatest achievements was not military conquest, but legal order. Roman law became the backbone of the empire. It structured governance, defined citizenship, regulated property, and established procedures that outlived emperors and dynasties. The genius of Rome was not only in its legions but in its ability to transform power into system. Law unified diverse provinces under a shared framework. It created predictability. It reduced chaos. It allowed an empire of immense scale to function with coherence. In the early republic, law was a stabilizing force against personal ambition. Offices were temporary. Power was limited. Institutions checked one another. Even generals, at least in theory, answered to civic authority. The rule of law restrained excess and reinforced collective identity. Citizens believed the system was larger than any individual. Legitimacy rested not only on force, but on procedure. But institutions require integrity to endure. As Rome expanded and wealth accumulated, law increasingly became vulnerable to manipulation. Political competition intensified. Elections grew expensive. Patronage networks deepened. Ambitious leaders discovered that influence could bend legal boundaries. Bribery seeped into administration. Provincial governors exploited distant territories for personal enrichment. Oversight weakened as distance from the capital increased. Corruption rarely begins with dramatic betrayal. It begins with small concessions. A favor granted. A law selectively enforced. An appointment secured through loyalty rather than merit. Each compromise appears manageable in isolation. Yet collectively, they erode trust. When citizens perceive that law is applied unevenly, legitimacy weakens. When rules serve elites rather than the public, cynicism replaces respect. The transition from republic to empire intensified this dynamic. As emperors consolidated authority, institutions became increasingly dependent on personal will. Stability relied on the character of the ruler rather than the resilience of the system. Some emperors governed effectively. Others ruled through paranoia or incompetence. The legal structure remained, but its enforcement fluctuated with personality. Military influence further destabilized legal order. Generals with loyal troops could challenge political authority. Law became negotiable when backed by armed force. Civil wars exposed fragility within institutional design. Power shifted from civic legitimacy to coercive leverage. The empire that once prided itself on law found itself increasingly governed by proximity to force. Corruption has a psychological dimension as well. When individuals observe misconduct at high levels, moral standards adjust downward. If they exploit the system, why shouldn't I, becomes a quiet justification. Corruption spreads not only through policy but through perception. Once trust dissolves, compliance becomes transactional. Law is no longer respected, it is navigated. Importantly, the Roman legal framework did not disappear overnight. It continued to function in many respects. Contracts were enforced. Trade operated. Courts existed. But beneath the surface, credibility weakened. And credibility is the invisible foundation of law. Without trust, even well-designed institutions become brittle. The contrast between strong law and corruption reveals a crucial tension. Law centralizes authority in abstract principle. Corruption personalizes authority around individual gain. When the latter overwhelms the former, institutions hollow from within. Externally, Rome still appeared structured and orderly. Internally, moral cohesion thinned. Empires do not collapse the moment corruption appears. They collapse when corruption becomes normalized and self-sustaining. When legal mechanisms exist but are no longer believed to be impartial. When citizens comply out of necessity rather than conviction. When the rule of law transforms into rule by influence. Rome's tragedy was not that it lacked laws. It was that over time, enforcement weakened, ambition outpaced accountability, and personal power overshadowed institutional restraint. The framework remained, but the spirit eroded. In the confrontation between strong law and corruption, law builds legitimacy slowly. Corruption undermines it quietly. And when legitimacy fades, even powerful empires begin to fracture from within. Rome was not destroyed in a single battle. It was weakened slowly, from within. Discipline faded. Law weakened. Comfort replaced responsibility. And when the final blow came, Rome was already tired. History is not just about the past. It is about patterns. If you want to explore how empires rise, decay, and repeat the same mistakes, subscribe to the channel. Because the fall of Rome is not just history. It is a warning.
The Italian peninsula has stood at the crossroads of ambition, fear, and destiny. Long before it became a modern nation, this narrow stretch of land was already shaping the fate of continents. Mountains guarded it, seas fed it, but it was not geography alone that made Italy unforgettable. It was conflict. Again and again, armies marched across these valleys, generals gambled everything on open fields, and entire civilizations rose or collapsed in the shadow of Italian soil. If you listen closely to history, you begin to notice a pattern. Italy was never just a place where wars happened. It was a place where the rules of war were rewritten. To understand why, we have to go back to the beginning, to a time when Rome was not yet an empire, not yet a legend, but a fragile republic surrounded by enemies. In those early centuries, survival demanded innovation. Discipline became a weapon. Organization became a shield. And slowly, almost quietly, Rome built the most efficient military machine the ancient world had ever seen. But power always attracts resistance. Every victory planted the seeds of a future challenge, and every expansion created new frontiers that had to be defended in blood. What makes the story of Italy's battles so compelling is not simply the scale of violence, but the psychological turning points hidden within them. Again and again, decisive moments unfolded here. Moments when overconfidence destroyed mighty armies, when brilliant tactics reversed the course of empires, and when belief itself became a force as powerful as any sword. On these fields, Hannibal humiliated Rome. On these roads, Constantine reshaped the religious future of Europe. In these mountains and monasteries, modern mechanized warfare revealed that even in the 20th century, the ancient cost of war had not changed. But there is a deeper question beneath the surface of all these battles, and it is the question that will guide our journey today. Why did so many decisive confrontations converge on Italy? Was it simply geography, a peninsula stretching into the heart of the Mediterranean? Or was there something more structural at work? Throughout history, Italy has functioned like a pressure point of power. Control Italy, and you influence trade. Influence trade, and you shape wealth. Shape wealth, and sooner or later, armies will follow. The peninsula became a magnet for ambition, and ambition, as history repeatedly shows us, rarely arrives peacefully. In this documentary, we are not just listing famous battles. We are tracing patterns of strategy, of human psychology, of fatal mistakes repeated across centuries, from the annihilation at Cannae to the desperate struggle at Monte Cassino. Each battle we explore will reveal something unsettling. Technology evolves, weapons change, uniforms modernize, yet the core behaviors of commanders and nations remain hauntingly familiar. Pride, adaptation, miscalculation, desperation. These forces echo across time more consistently than any marching army. So as we move forward, do not watch these battles as distant historical events. Watch them as case studies of human decision under extreme pressure, because the most dangerous illusion in history has always been the belief that this time we are different. Time and again, Italy's battlefields have exposed that illusion, brutally and decisively. In the summer of 216 BCE, under the burning sun of southern Italy, one of the most devastating military disasters in human history unfolded. The Battle of Cannae was not merely a clash between Rome and Carthage. It was a brutal lesson in how confidence, when left unchecked, can become a weapon turned inward. By this point in the Second Punic War, Rome was angry, humiliated, and desperate to crush the Carthaginian general Hannibal once and for all. What followed instead was a masterpiece of tactical genius that military academies still study more than 2,000 years later. Hannibal had already shocked the Roman world. He had done the impossible, crossing the Alps with war elephants and a multinational army, striking directly into the Italian heartland. Roman pride could not tolerate his continued presence. Determined to end the threat, Rome assembled one of the largest armies it had ever fielded, estimated at around 80,000 infantry and several thousand cavalry. Their plan was simple and brutally Roman: overwhelm Hannibal with sheer mass and discipline. It was the kind of strategy that had worked for generations, but Hannibal was not fighting Rome's previous wars. As the two armies formed near the dusty plains of Cannae, Hannibal made a decision that revealed his deep understanding of Roman psychology. Instead of reinforcing his center, he deliberately weakened it. His infantry in the middle formed a slightly protruding crescent, inviting, almost tempting the Romans forward. On the flanks, however, he placed his strongest troops and, most critically, his superior cavalry. The Roman commanders, seeing what appeared to be a vulnerable enemy center, did exactly what Hannibal expected. Confident in their numerical superiority, they drove their heavy infantry forward in a dense mass, pushing the Carthaginian center back step by step. To the Romans, it looked like victory unfolding in real time. The enemy line was bending, the center was collapsing. Momentum was theirs, but the retreat was an illusion. Slowly, deliberately, Hannibal's center fell back in a controlled withdrawal, transforming the original crescent into a concave pocket. The more the Romans pushed forward, the deeper they advanced into a tightening trap. Meanwhile, on the wings, Carthaginian cavalry crushed the Roman horsemen and swept behind the Roman infantry. What had begun as a straightforward frontal assault was now becoming something far more dangerous: an encirclement. Then the trap closed. Carthaginian forces pivoted inward from both flanks, while cavalry sealed the rear. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers suddenly found themselves surrounded on all sides, packed so tightly they could barely raise their weapons. In the suffocating heat and dust, command and control disintegrated. What followed was not a battle in the traditional sense, but a systematic destruction. By the end of the day, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 Roman soldiers lay dead. One of the worst single-day losses in Roman history. The psychological shock to Rome was enormous. Entire noble families were wiped out. Political leaders panicked. The Republic for a moment stood on the edge of existential collapse. Yet what makes Cannae even more fascinating is what did not happen next. Hannibal had won one of the most perfect tactical victories in military history. But Rome did not surrender. Instead, the Republic adapted, avoided large pitched battles, and slowly rebuilt its strength. Here lies the deeper lesson of Cannae. Brilliant victories can destroy armies, but they do not always destroy systems. Hannibal mastered the battlefield that day. His double envelopment remains one of the most studied maneuvers in military history, copied in theory by generals from Napoleon to modern war colleges. Yet Rome's institutional resilience, its ability to absorb catastrophic loss and continue, ultimately determined the long-term outcome of the war. 16 years after Rome's nightmare at Cannae, the war that had once threatened to break the Republic reached its decisive turning point on the plains near Zama in North Africa. This was no longer the story of a rising invader, shocking an unprepared superpower. This was something far more dangerous. Rome had learned. The Battle of Zama in 202 BCE was the moment when adaptation defeated genius and when patience proved more powerful than brilliance. By the time Hannibal returned from Italy to defend Carthage, the strategic situation had completely changed. His long campaign in Italy had inflicted terrible damage on Rome, but it had failed to deliver the one thing he truly needed: political collapse. Rome had refused to negotiate, refused to surrender, and most importantly, refused to fight Hannibal again on his terms. Instead, a new Roman commander had emerged, Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, a general who had studied Hannibal carefully and understood that defeating him required more than courage. It required imitation, discipline, and psychological control. Scipio did something few Roman commanders had dared to do before. He respected his enemy. Rather than confronting Hannibal directly in Italy, Scipio carried the war into North Africa itself, forcing Carthage into a defensive position. The move was strategically brilliant. Hannibal, the master of offensive maneuver, was now compelled to fight to protect his homeland. For the first time in the war, the initiative had shifted. When the two legendary commanders finally faced each other at Zama, it was not just a battle. It was a collision between two military philosophies that had been evolving for over a decade. Hannibal still possessed one terrifying advantage: his war elephants. Nearly 80 of these massive animals stood at the front of the Carthaginian army, intended to break Roman formations through shock and panic. Against most armies of the ancient world, this alone might have decided the battle. But Scipio had prepared. Instead of forming the traditional dense Roman battle line, he arranged his maniples in staggered columns, leaving deliberate corridors between units. It was a subtle but revolutionary adaptation. When the Carthaginian elephants charged forward, trumpeting and shaking the ground beneath them, the Roman soldiers did something unexpected. They did not panic. They did not break formation. At Scipio's signal, trumpets blasted, ranks shifted, and the elephants were funneled harmlessly through the open lanes, where many were driven off or turned back into Carthaginian lines. In that moment, Hannibal lost his psychological edge. The battle then evolved into a brutal infantry struggle between two of the most experienced armies of the ancient world. Hannibal's veterans from Italy fought with desperate discipline, and for a time, the outcome remained uncertain. But once again, cavalry decided the day, just as it had at Cannae, but this time in Rome's favor. Roman and Numidian cavalry under Massinissa drove off their Carthaginian counterparts and later returned to strike Hannibal's rear. The encirclement Hannibal had once perfected was now used against him. Caught between Roman infantry in front and cavalry behind, the Carthaginian army began to collapse. By the end of the fighting, Hannibal suffered his first truly decisive defeat. Carthage soon sued for peace, and the Second Punic War, one of the most dangerous conflicts Rome had ever faced, came to an end. But the deeper meaning of Zama goes far beyond the battlefield. Cannae showed the power of tactical genius. Zama revealed the power of institutional learning. Rome did not win because it suddenly became more brilliant than Hannibal. It won because it adapted faster than Carthage could recover. The Republic absorbed its worst defeat, studied its enemy, changed its methods, and returned stronger. Scipio's victory was not built on Roman tradition alone. It was built on Rome's willingness to evolve. This is why military historians often see Zama as one of the most important battles in ancient history. It marked the moment when Rome proved something that would define its rise for centuries. The Republic could lose catastrophically and still come back smarter. Hannibal left the battlefield alive, but the balance of power in the Mediterranean had permanently shifted. Rome was no longer merely resilient. Rome had learned how to win. In the year 9 CE, deep within the dark and rain-soaked forests of Germania, the unstoppable image of Rome met something it rarely faced: total annihilation. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest was not simply a defeat. It was a psychological wound that reshaped Roman strategy for generations. For the first time in centuries, Rome's expansion machine did not merely stumble, it shattered. At this point, the Roman Empire stood at the height of its confidence. Under Augustus, Rome had expanded across the Mediterranean world with disciplined efficiency. Provinces fell, roads spread, legions marched with mechanical precision. Germania, the wild lands beyond the Rhine, appeared to be just another region waiting to be absorbed into the Roman system. Governor Publius Quinctilius Varus believed the region was already effectively pacified. That belief would prove catastrophic. What Varus did not fully understand was the man standing beside him. Arminius was no ordinary tribal leader. He had been raised in the Roman world, trained in Roman military methods, and even granted Roman citizenship. To Rome, he was a useful ally, proof that even the barbarians could be integrated into imperial order. But Arminius had been studying Rome far more carefully than Rome had been studying him. He understood Roman marching discipline, Roman column structure, and most importantly, Roman overconfidence in supposedly secured territory. In early autumn, Varus made a decision that would seal the fate of 3 Roman legions. Acting on intelligence secretly manipulated by Arminius, he led his forces off the safer main routes and deep into the dense Teutoburg forest to suppress what he believed was a minor local uprising. It was exactly the move Arminius had been waiting for. The Roman column stretched for miles. This was not a battle formation. It was a marching convoy, heavy infantry, cavalry, baggage trains, camp followers, all strung out along narrow, muddy forest paths. Rain began to fall. The ground softened. Visibility dropped. Communication between units weakened. The legendary Roman order was slowly dissolving into something far more fragile. Then the forest came alive. Germanic warriors struck from the trees in coordinated waves, hurling spears and vanishing back into the woods before the Romans could properly form ranks. This was not open field warfare where Roman discipline dominated. This was controlled chaos, exactly the environment Rome's system was least suited to handle. Every attempt to regroup was disrupted by terrain, weather, and relentless harassment. What made the disaster worse was time. The ambush did not end in a single afternoon. For 3 days, the Roman force struggled through mud, rain, and constant attacks. Units became separated, command cohesion collapsed, defensive camps were hastily built and then overrun. Panic spread unevenly but steadily through the exhausted ranks. By the final phase of the disaster, the Roman army was no longer functioning as a coordinated force. It was a collection of isolated pockets fighting for survival in hostile terrain. Varus himself, realizing the scale of the catastrophe, took his own life rather than face capture. 3 Roman legions, 17, 18, and 19, were effectively wiped from existence. The psychological shock in Rome was immense. According to later accounts, Emperor Augustus was said to have wandered his palace in anguish, repeatedly crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." Whether literal or symbolic, the story captures the scale of the trauma. Rome, the empire that imposed order everywhere it marched, had been humiliated by terrain, deception, and its own assumptions. But the most important consequence of Teutoburg was strategic. Rome never again seriously attempted to fully conquer Germania east of the Rhine. The empire adapted, fortified its borders, and shifted from aggressive expansion in that region to controlled containment. In this sense, Teutoburg Forest did something rare in history. It permanently altered the map of empire. And here lies the deeper pattern. Cannae showed how overconfidence on the battlefield can destroy an army. Zama showed how adaptation can restore a superpower. Teutoburg revealed something even more unsettling. Sometimes the most dangerous moment for an empire is the moment it believes resistance is already finished. In the silent forests of Germania, Rome learned that lesson the hard way. And the echoes of that ambush would shape imperial strategy for centuries to come. In October of the year 312 CE, just outside the northern gates of Rome, a battle took place that would change not only who ruled the Roman Empire, but what the empire would ultimately believe. The Battle of the Milvian Bridge was not the largest clash in Roman history. nor the bloodiest. Yet its consequences would ripple far beyond the battlefield, reshaping the religious and political future of Europe for centuries. By the early 4th century, the Roman world was no longer unified under a single uncontested authority. The empire had fractured into competing power centers, each ruled by ambitious men who claimed legitimacy. Among them was Constantine, a rising military commander in the west, and Maxentius, the ruler who controlled Rome itself. Their confrontation was inevitable. What neither side fully realized was that this battle would become as much psychological and symbolic as it was military. As Constantine marched toward Rome, later sources describe a moment that would become one of the most famous visions in Western history. According to Christian writers, Constantine saw a sign in the sky, a cross of light accompanied by the words often translated as, "In this sign you will conquer." That night, he reportedly dreamed that he should mark his soldiers' shields with the Chi Rho symbol, an early Christian emblem. Whether one interprets the story as divine intervention, political calculation, or later propaganda, the psychological effect was undeniable. Constantine entered the coming battle not merely as a claimant to power, but as a commander who believed, or at least projected, that destiny itself stood behind him. Maxentius, meanwhile, made a critical strategic choice. Instead of remaining safely within Rome's massive defensive walls, he marched his forces north to meet Constantine near the Milvian Bridge over the Tiber River. It was a decision driven partly by pressure, partly by confidence, and partly by the symbolic importance of confronting the challenger directly. But the terrain he chose would soon become a trap. On October 28th, the armies collided. Constantine's troops, hardened by campaign experience, pressed aggressively against Maxentius's lines. The fighting itself followed familiar Roman patterns: disciplined infantry engagements, cavalry maneuvers, controlled advances. But the true drama unfolded not in the opening clash, but in the collapse that followed. As Constantine's forces gained momentum, Maxentius's army began to fall back toward the Tiber. The retreat soon became chaotic. The temporary bridge structures behind Maxentius's lines, hastily constructed for maneuver, turned into deadly bottlenecks. Soldiers crowded together in panic. Formations dissolved. Many were pushed into the river and drowned beneath the weight of armor and shields. Maxentius himself did not escape. In the confusion of the retreat, he was thrown into the Tiber River and killed. His body later recovered downstream. With his death, Constantine emerged as the uncontested master of the Western Roman Empire. But the true turning point came in what followed the victory. In the months and years after Milvian Bridge, Constantine moved to legalize and increasingly favor Christianity within the empire. The Edict of Milan in 313 granted religious tolerance, ending the era of systematic Christian persecution. Over time, what had once been a marginalized and often hunted faith would move steadily toward the center of imperial power. This is why the Battle of the Milvian Bridge occupies such a unique place in history. It was not merely a military victory. It was a moment when belief itself became a strategic force. For centuries afterward, historians and philosophers would debate the same unsettling question: did Constantine truly convert out of faith? Or did he recognize earlier than others that the psychological power of Christianity could help stabilize a changing empire? The battlefield does not give us a clear answer, but it does reveal a pattern that echoes throughout history. When political survival, military success, and emerging belief systems intersect, the consequences rarely remain confined to one generation. At the Milvian Bridge, one man won a civil war, but the deeper victory, the one that would shape empires, laws, and identities for centuries, had only just begun. In the spring of 1176, on the plains near the small town of Legnano in northern Italy, a confrontation unfolded that would redefine the balance between empire and city. Unlike many famous battles of history, Legnano was not simply about territorial conquest. It was about political identity, about whether the rising communes of northern Italy could resist the gravitational pull of imperial control. What happened that day proved that even in the age of emperors, power was beginning to decentralize. At the center of the conflict stood Frederick I, better known as Barbarossa, the formidable Holy Roman Emperor whose ambition was nothing less than the full restoration of imperial authority over the wealthy Italian city-states. For years, Barbarossa had marched repeatedly into northern Italy, determined to impose order on the increasingly independent communes. Cities like Milan, Cremona, and Brescia were no longer passive medieval towns. They were growing economic powers with their own militias, political councils, and fierce civic pride. In response to imperial pressure, these cities formed something unusual for the medieval world: a coalition. Known as the Lombard League, this alliance represented a new kind of political organism, decentralized, locally driven, but united by a shared fear of imperial domination. It was not an empire, it was not a kingdom, it was something more fragile and, in some ways, more modern. When Barbarossa advanced again into Lombard territory in 1176, he expected another demonstration of imperial superiority. After all, imperial cavalry, heavily armored knights, had dominated European battlefields for generations. Against them stood largely militia-based infantry from the city communes. On paper, the outcome should have been predictable, but Legnano would expose the danger of fighting an enemy whose motivation is rooted in survival rather than expansion. At the heart of the Lombard League's defensive formation stood the Carroccio, a massive ceremonial war wagon carrying the city standard, the communal cross, and the symbolic identity of the Allied cities. More than a tactical anchor, the Carroccio was psychological gravity. Around it gathered the infantry militias, particularly the famous Company of Death, who reportedly swore to defend the banner at all costs. In medieval warfare, where morale often decided outcomes faster than steel, symbols like this could become force multipliers. When the imperial forces made contact, Barbarossa's cavalry initially performed exactly as expected. The armored knights charged with devastating momentum, attempting to break the Lombard infantry line through shock and speed. For a moment, it appeared the imperial model of warfare would once again prove dominant. But the Lombard line did not collapse. Anchored around the Carroccio and fighting with the desperation of men defending their political autonomy, the infantry absorbed the cavalry assaults. As the imperial charge lost cohesion and momentum, the battle began to shift. Lombard forces counterattacked. Confusion spread among Barbarossa's ranks. At some point in the chaos, the emperor himself was unhorsed, and rumors of his death rippled through the imperial army, a psychological blow that medieval forces rarely recovered from quickly. What followed was not merely a tactical setback, but a cascading collapse. Imperial forces withdrew, and the Lombard League secured one of the most symbolically powerful victories of medieval Italy. But the true importance of Legnano lies beyond the battlefield. This was one of the earliest moments in European history when organized urban communes successfully resisted the direct military pressure of a traditional feudal empire. It signaled that the political future of Italy would not belong exclusively to emperors and kings. Cities, wealthy, organized, and fiercely protective of their autonomy, were becoming major actors in their own right. In the years that followed, Barbarossa was forced to negotiate. The Peace of Constance in 1183 effectively recognized many of the Lombard cities' self-governing rights. The imperial dream of fully subduing northern Italy had been permanently complicated. Legnano therefore stands as a quiet but profound turning point. Not because it was the largest battle, not because it was the bloodiest, but because it revealed something that would shape Italian history for centuries. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent for an empire is not another empire, but a network of smaller powers that refuse to be absorbed. In September 1515, just southeast of Milan, the elegant world of the Renaissance collided with the brutal reality of early modern warfare. The Battle of Marignano was supposed to be another campaign in the long Italian wars, another contest for influence over the wealthy and strategically vital Duchy of Milan. Instead, it became one of the most ferocious and exhausting battles of the 16th century, a two-day struggle so intense that contemporaries remembered it not as a maneuver, but as a slaughter. By the early 1500s, Italy had become Europe's geopolitical magnet. Its cities were rich, its trade routes vital, and its political fragmentation irresistible to ambitious monarchs. Into this volatile landscape marched the young and aggressive King Francis I of France, determined to reclaim Milan and prove his legitimacy on the European stage. Opposing him were the Swiss Confederates, perhaps the most feared infantry force in Europe at the time. The Swiss reputation was not exaggerated. For decades, Swiss pikemen had dominated European battlefields. Their dense pike squares, aggressive shock tactics, and near-fanatical discipline had broken cavalry charges and crushed traditional feudal armies. Many commanders believed that when the Swiss advanced in full formation, the only rational response was retreat. Francis I understood this reputation well, and yet he chose to engage them directly. This decision alone guaranteed that Marignano would be decided the hard way. On September 13th, the Swiss launched a sudden and aggressive assault against the French positions near the village of Marignano, modern Melegnano. True to their doctrine, they advanced in massive, tightly packed pike columns, driving forward with relentless momentum. The initial shock was enormous. French lines buckled under the pressure as the Swiss infantry forced brutal close-quarters combat. But this was not the medieval battlefield the Swiss had mastered. Francis I's army represented the evolving face of Renaissance warfare, a hybrid force combining heavy cavalry, professional infantry, and increasingly important field artillery. As the Swiss pressed forward, French guns roared across the field, tearing gaps into the advancing formations. Still, the Swiss did not break. Fighting continued into the night, illuminated by torches, burning debris, and the flashes of gunpowder. A rare and terrifying spectacle for early 16th century warfare. When dawn came on September 14th, the battlefield was already carpeted with casualties. The fighting resumed with renewed fury. At several points, the outcome hung in the balance. Swiss infantry again pushed deep into French lines, and hand-to-hand combat became widespread. Francis I himself reportedly fought in the melee, later portraying the battle as the moment he earned his knightly reputation. Whether embellished or not, the claim reflects how personally and symbolically invested leaders were in the outcome. The decisive shift came with the arrival of Venetian allied forces supporting the French. Their intervention added fresh pressure against the already exhausted Swiss formations. After 2 days of nearly continuous combat, something extremely rare for the time, the Swiss finally began to withdraw in organized retreat. The cost had been staggering. Marignano shocked Europe not just because of who won, but because of how the battle was fought. It exposed a military transition already underway. The age of purely infantry shock dominance was ending. Combined arms, artillery, cavalry, and coordinated infantry were becoming the new language of European warfare. For the Swiss, the psychological impact was profound. Although still respected, their aura of near invincibility had been broken. In the years following Marignano, Swiss foreign policy shifted increasingly toward neutrality, a strategic cultural pivot whose echoes remain visible even today. For Francis I, the victory secured Milan temporarily and elevated his prestige across Europe. But the deeper lesson of Marignano reaches beyond immediate political gains. The battle revealed a pattern that appears again and again in military history. No battlefield dominance lasts forever. Every invincible system eventually meets an adaptation designed to break it. At Marignano, the Renaissance, often remembered for art, humanism, and cultural brilliance, showed its other face. Beneath the beauty of the era was a rapidly evolving machine of war, one that was becoming more industrial, more coordinated, and far more lethal. The age of knights was not yet over, but after Marignano, it was clear. The future of warfare had already begun to change. In the winter of 1944, high in the rugged mountains of central Italy, one of the most brutal and frustrating battles of the Second World War unfolded. The Battle of Monte Cassino was not a swift clash of maneuver or a dramatic single-day decision. It was a grinding, months-long struggle of mud, stone, and exhaustion. A modern siege fought under the shadow of an ancient monastery. By the time it ended, tens of thousands of soldiers would be dead or wounded, and the road to Rome would be paved with one of the most controversial decisions of the war. After the Allied landings in southern Italy in 1943, the campaign quickly slowed. German forces under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring executed a masterclass in defensive warfare, constructing a series of fortified lines across the Italian peninsula. The most formidable of these was the Gustav Line, anchored in the mountains around the town of Cassino. At its center stood the Abbey of Monte Cassino, a historic Benedictine monastery perched high above the valley, commanding the approaches to Rome. Geography had become Germany's greatest ally. Steep ridges, narrow valleys, winter rains, and limited maneuver space neutralized much of the Allies' advantage in numbers and mechanization. Tanks struggled to move. Infantry advanced under constant observation. Artillery positions were exposed. Every approach toward Cassino funneled attackers into carefully prepared killing zones. What looked manageable on maps became nightmarish on the ground. The Allied command understood one thing clearly: Rome could not be taken without breaking the Gustav Line, and the Gustav Line could not be broken without neutralizing Monte Cassino. The first assaults began in January 1944. Allied infantry pushed forward through mud and flooded rivers under heavy German fire. Progress was slow and costly. Positions changed hands repeatedly. Units became exhausted. Still, the German defenders, particularly elite paratroopers, held firm in the mountains and ruins surrounding the abbey. Then came the decision that would haunt the battle's legacy. Fearing that German observers were using the monastery to direct artillery, a claim still debated by historians, Allied commanders ordered the abbey bombed on February 15, 1944. Waves of bombers reduced the centuries-old structure to rubble in a massive airstrike. It was one of the most controversial moments of the Italian campaign. Ironically, the destruction made the tactical situation worse. Before the bombing, German forces had largely avoided occupying the monastery itself out of respect for its cultural significance. After the abbey became ruins, however, the shattered stone provided perfect defensive cover. German paratroopers moved into the debris and transformed it into a fortress of broken walls and sniper positions. What had been a landmark became a killing ground. The battle dragged on through multiple Allied offensives, 4 major assaults in total. Polish forces, British units, American divisions, French colonial troops, and others all cycled through the meat grinder of Cassino. Fighting often devolved into close-quarters combat among rubble piles and cratered slopes. Rain turned the battlefield into mud. Supply lines strained under constant fire. Morale fluctuated between grim determination and sheer exhaustion. Only in May 1944 did the deadlock finally break. During the fourth major offensive, coordinated Allied pressure across the Gustav Line began to overwhelm German defenses. Polish troops made the final push toward the ruins of the monastery, raising their flag over Monte Cassino after days of brutal fighting. German forces conducted a fighting withdrawal northward, and the road to Rome finally opened. Allied troops entered the Italian capital in early June, but Monte Cassino left behind a complicated legacy. Tactically, it was an Allied victory. Strategically, it helped push German forces out of central Italy. Yet the cost was enormous. Over 70,000 Allied casualties and tens of thousands of German losses. The destruction of the historic abbey also sparked lasting debate about military necessity versus cultural preservation. And beneath the statistics lies the deeper pattern that echoes across centuries of warfare in Italy. Cannae showed the danger of overconfidence. Teutoburg showed the danger of underestimating terrain. Monte Cassino revealed something painfully modern. Even with overwhelming technology, even with air power, artillery, and mechanized armies, war in difficult terrain still reduces to the oldest formula in history: men climbing hills under fire. On the shattered heights of Monte Cassino, the modern world rediscovered a brutal truth the ancients had known all along. Some battlefields refused to be conquered quickly. Across more than 2,000 years of conflict, the Italian peninsula has witnessed something few regions on Earth can claim. Empires rose here with absolute confidence. Armies marched here with mathematical precision. Generals arrived believing they were writing the final chapter of history. And again, they were proven wrong. If we step back from the individual battles, from Cannae's perfect trap, from Zama's disciplined revenge, from the forest catastrophe of Teutoburg, from the faith-charged victory at the Milvian Bridge, from the civic defiance of Legnano, from the bloody evolution at Marignano, and from the grinding agony of Monte Cassino, a deeper pattern begins to emerge. Italy was never just a battlefield. It was a testing ground for human behavior under pressure. Here, overconfidence repeatedly walked into carefully prepared traps. Here, defeated powers sometimes returned stronger than before. Here, belief systems proved capable of reshaping political realities. Here, geography humbled even the most technologically advanced armies. And here, perhaps most importantly, we see that the tools of war evolve far faster than the psychology of the people who wage it. This is the first lesson Italy teaches us. Victory on the battlefield is rarely the end of the story. Hannibal achieved near perfection at Cannae and still lost the war. Rome suffered humiliation in the Teutoburg forest and still remained an empire. At Monte Cassino, modern mechanized armies discovered that even 20th century firepower could be slowed by mountains, weather, and determined defenders. History, especially in Italy, punishes those who mistake tactical success for strategic finality. But there is a second, more unsettling lesson. Systems that survive are not always the strongest. They are the most adaptive. Rome's true power was never just its legions. It was its institutional stubbornness, its ability to absorb catastrophic loss without psychological collapse. The Lombard cities at Legnano succeeded not because they were individually stronger than Barbarossa's empire, but because they coordinated when survival demanded it. Francis I prevailed at Marignano because his army represented a transitional model of warfare, not a static one. Over and over, Italy shows us the same uncomfortable truth. Rigidity breaks, adaptation endures, and yet, beneath all the strategy, all the formations, all the technological shifts, something far more constant remains: human nature. The fear that spreads in a collapsing formation, the pride that pushes commanders into risky battles, the belief almost always present, that this time we are different. Italy's battlefields expose that illusion with brutal consistency, because whether the soldiers carried short Roman swords, Renaissance pikes, or modern rifles, the emotional landscape of war remained hauntingly familiar. Anxiety, momentum, miscalculation, desperation. These forces travel through centuries almost untouched by time. This may be the deepest lesson of all. History does not repeat because events are identical. It repeats because human reactions are. And that is why the story of Italy's great battles still matters today. Not as distant military trivia, not as romanticized legends of the past, but as mirrors, uncomfortable, precise mirrors, reflecting how power behaves, how systems respond to shock, and how quickly confidence can turn into vulnerability. If we listen carefully, the battlefields of Italy are still speaking. They are telling us that geography shapes opportunity, that belief can move armies, that adaptation determines survival. But above everything else, they whisper one enduring warning. The greatest danger in history has never been the enemy across the field. It has been the moment a civilization becomes certain it can no longer lose. When we place Cannae, Zama, Teutoburg Forest, Milvian Bridge, Legnano, Marignano, and Monte Cassino side by side, something remarkable appears. On the surface, these battles span more than 2 millennia, involve completely different weapons, and reflect radically different political worlds. But underneath, the same strategic DNA keeps repeating. Italy's battlefields reveal not random victories and defeats, but a set of recurring strategic laws, principles that determined outcomes again and again. Let's break the unified strategy into its core pillars. 1. Control of space beats raw strength. One of the clearest patterns across these battles is simple but brutal. The side that shaped the battlefield usually shaped the outcome. At Cannae, Hannibal compressed Roman mass into a killing pocket. At Teutoburg, Arminius weaponized forest and weather. At Monte Cassino, German forces turned mountains into force multipliers. At Legnano, the Lombard League anchored defense around the Carroccio. The winners did not just fight the enemy, they forced the enemy to fight in the wrong environment. Strategic law. Terrain is not background. It is an active weapon. Empires repeatedly forgot this. Their opponents repeatedly exploited it. Puzzle 2. Adaptation defeats tradition. The second pattern is even more important. Across centuries, the losing side was usually the one fighting yesterday's war. Rome at Cannae relied on mass and frontal pressure. Hannibal at Zama relied on shock elephants, but Rome had adapted. Swiss infantry at Marignano trusted their old pike dominance. German defenders at Monte Cassino used modern elastic defense. In each case, static confidence met dynamic adjustment, and dynamic adjustment won. Strategic law. Military systems rarely collapse from weakness. They collapse from rigidity. This is why Rome ultimately survived Hannibal, and why the Swiss aura broke at Marignano. 3. Psychological shock is a force multiplier. Italy's battles repeatedly show that morale collapse spreads faster than physical destruction. Consider the pattern. At Cannae, encirclement created panic suffocation. At Teutoburg, confusion destroyed Roman cohesion. At Milvian Bridge, retreat bottlenecks triggered mass drowning. At Legnano, rumors of Barbarossa's fall shook imperial morale. In many cases, armies were not fully destroyed first. They mentally broke first. Strategic law. The fastest way to destroy an army is to destroy its sense of control. The best commanders in Italy understood this deeply. Hannibal, Arminius, Scipio, Kesselring, different centuries, same psychological warfare. 4. Systems that absorb shock survive. Now we reach the most important long-term pattern. Some armies lost battles and disappeared. Others lost catastrophically and came back stronger. Why? Because of system resilience. Rome survived Cannae because its political structure held. Rome adjusted after Teutoburg and stabilized the Rhine. The Lombard cities coordinated under existential pressure. Allied forces at Monte Cassino rotated multinational armies until breakthrough. Meanwhile, Carthage could not regenerate like Rome. Swiss dominance could not evolve fast enough. Maxentius's regime collapsed with one defeat. Strategic law, tactical brilliance wins days. Institutional resilience wins centuries. Italy shows this pattern with brutal clarity. 5. Overconfidence is the recurring killer. If there is one psychological thread running through nearly every disaster in Italy, it is this: premature certainty. Rome before Cannae, Varus before Teutoburg, Maxentius before Milvian Bridge, Imperial Knights before Legnano, Swiss infantry before Marignano. Each believed the situation was already under control. Each was wrong. Strategic law. The most dangerous phase of any campaign is the moment victory feels inevitable. Italy's soil is littered with armies that learned this too late. The grand strategic pattern: when we compress 2,000 years of warfare in Italy into one unified model, the pattern becomes almost mathematical. Winning formula: shape the terrain, adapt faster than the enemy, break enemy psychology, maintain institutional resilience, avoid strategic arrogance. Miss 2 or 3 of these, and even the strongest empire begins to bleed. Final insight, your channel tone. Italy does not just show us famous battles. It shows us a recurring human equation. Weapons evolve, uniforms change, empires rename themselves. But under pressure, human decision-making follows the same dangerous rhythms. And perhaps that is the most uncomfortable lesson Italy offers us. The greatest military advantage in history has never been numbers, never been technology, but the rare ability to recognize when the old rules are about to fail. When we step away from formations, casualty numbers, and shifting front lines, the Italian battlefields begin to reveal something far more unsettling than military history. They reveal human nature under pressure. Across Cannae, Zama, Teutoburg, Milvian Bridge, Legnano, Marignano, and Monte Cassino, one truth keeps resurfacing with quiet persistence. History changes its weapons far faster than humans change their instincts. This is the first philosophical lesson. 1. Intelligence without humility becomes self-destructive. At Cannae, Rome had numbers, discipline, and confidence. At Teutoburg, Varus had imperial authority and experience. At Milvian Bridge, Maxentius had the defensive advantage. What they lacked was not intelligence. It was humility before uncertainty. Again and again, Italy shows us that the most dangerous leaders are not the ignorant ones, but the ones who believe the situation is already fully understood. Philosophical insight: the mind that stops questioning is already walking toward its own trap. This applies far beyond battlefields, to politics, systems, even personal decisions. 2. Adaptation is the deepest form of strength. Rome survived Cannae not because it was unbeatable, but because it was psychologically elastic. The Lombard cities at Legnano survived because they coordinated when survival demanded it. At Monte Cassino, victory came not from one decisive blow, but from sustained adjustment under pressure. Philosophically, this points to something profound. Strength is not rigidity. Strength is controlled flexibility. Civilizations, like individuals, rarely collapse at the moment of first failure. They collapse when they become incapable of changing course. 3. Control is often an illusion. Many commanders in Italy believed they were in control, right up until the moment everything unraveled. Romans at Cannae thought momentum guaranteed victory. Varus believed Germania was already pacified. Swiss pikemen trusted their historical dominance. Even modern planners at Monte Cassino underestimated terrain. The pattern is psychologically revealing. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty, so we create narratives of control, sometimes prematurely. Philosophical insight. The feeling of control and the reality of control are often dangerously different things. Italy's battlefields repeatedly expose this gap. 4. Systems matter more than moments. One of the most counterintuitive lessons is this. Hannibal won one of the most perfect battles in history and still lost the war. Rome lost catastrophically and still dominated the Mediterranean. Maxentius lost once, and his regime vanished. Philosophically, this reveals a harsh truth about history and life. Single moments rarely decide long-term outcomes. Systems do. Resilient systems absorb shock. Fragile systems shatter under it. This applies to empires, institutions, and even personal lives. 5. Human nature changes slowly, if at all. Perhaps the deepest lesson Italy offers is also the most uncomfortable. Across 2,000 years, the emotional patterns remain eerily consistent. Overconfidence before collapse, panic inside encirclement, hope placed in symbols, fear spreading faster than facts. Leaders believing this time is different. Weapons moved from short swords to artillery to aerial bombing, but the human nervous system did not evolve nearly as fast. Philosophical insight. History does not repeat because events are identical. It repeats because human reactions are. Italy is one of the clearest mirrors of this phenomenon. Final reflection, the quiet warning. If we listen carefully, Italy's battlefields are not just telling stories about the past. They are issuing a warning about the present. They remind us that confidence can become blindness. Power can create fragility. Victory can hide future defeat. And the greatest risks often appear precisely when everything seems stable, because the most dangerous moment in any system, military or civilian, is rarely the moment of obvious crisis. It is the moment of comfortable certainty. When we step away from formations, casualty numbers, and shifting front lines, the Italian battlefields begin to reveal something far more unsettling than military history. They reveal human nature under pressure. Across Cannae, Zama, Teutoburg, Milvian Bridge, Legnano, Marignano, and Monte Cassino, one truth keeps resurfacing with quiet persistence. History changes its weapons far faster than humans change their instincts. This is the first philosophical lesson. 1. Intelligence without humility becomes self-destructive. At Cannae, Rome had numbers, discipline, and confidence. At Teutoburg, Varus had imperial authority and experience. At Milvian Bridge, Maxentius had the defensive advantage. What they lacked was not intelligence. It was humility before uncertainty. Again and again, Italy shows us that the most dangerous leaders are not the ignorant ones, but the ones who believe the situation is already fully understood. Philosophical insight. The mind that stops questioning is already walking toward its own trap. This applies far beyond battlefields, to politics, systems, even personal decisions. 2. Adaptation is the deepest form of strength. Rome survived Cannae not because it was unbeatable, but because it was psychologically elastic. The Lombard cities at Legnano survived because they coordinated when survival demanded it. At Monte Cassino, victory came not from one decisive blow, but from sustained adjustment under pressure. Philosophically, this points to something profound. Strength is not rigidity. Strength is controlled flexibility. Civilizations, like individuals, rarely collapse at the moment of first failure. They collapse when they become incapable of changing course. 3. Control is often an illusion. Many commanders in Italy believed they were in control, right up until the moment everything unraveled. Romans at Cannae thought momentum guaranteed victory. Varus believed Germania was already pacified. Swiss pikemen trusted their historical dominance. Even modern planners at Monte Cassino underestimated terrain. The pattern is psychologically revealing. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty, so we create narratives of control, sometimes prematurely. Philosophical insight. The feeling of control and the reality of control are often dangerously different things. Italy's battlefields repeatedly expose this gap. 4. Systems matter more than moments. One of the most counterintuitive lessons is this. Hannibal won one of the most perfect battles in history and still lost the war. Rome lost catastrophically and still dominated the Mediterranean. Maxentius lost once, and his regime vanished. Philosophically, this reveals a harsh truth about history and life. Single moments rarely decide long-term outcomes. Systems do. Resilient systems absorb shock. Fragile systems shatter under it. This applies to empires, institutions, and even personal lives. 5. Human nature changes slowly, if at all. Perhaps the deepest lesson Italy offers is also the most uncomfortable. Across 2,000 years, the emotional patterns remain eerily consistent. Overconfidence before collapse, panic inside encirclement, hope placed in symbols, fear spreading faster than facts. Leaders believing this time is different. Weapons moved from short swords to artillery to aerial bombing, but the human nervous system did not evolve nearly as fast. Philosophical insight. History does not repeat because events are identical. It repeats because human reactions are. Italy is one of the clearest mirrors of this phenomenon. Final reflection, the quiet warning. If we listen carefully, Italy's battlefields are not just telling stories about the past. They are issuing a warning about the present. They remind us that confidence can become blindness. Power can create fragility. Victory can hide future defeat. And the greatest risks often appear precisely when everything seems stable, because the most dangerous moment in any system, military or civilian, is rarely the moment of obvious crisis. It is the moment of comfortable certainty. When we step away from formations, casualty numbers, and shifting front lines, the Italian battlefields begin to reveal something far more unsettling than military history. They reveal human nature under pressure. Across Cannae, Zama, Teutoburg, Milvian Bridge, Legnano, Marignano, and Monte Cassino, one truth keeps resurfacing with quiet persistence. History changes its weapons far faster than humans change their instincts. This is the first philosophical lesson. 1. Intelligence without humility becomes self-destructive. At Cannae, Rome had numbers, discipline, and confidence. At Teutoburg, Varus had imperial authority and experience. At Milvian Bridge, Maxentius had the defensive advantage. What they lacked was not intelligence. It was humility before uncertainty. Again and again, Italy shows us that the most dangerous leaders are not the ignorant ones, but the ones who believe the situation is already fully understood. Philosophical insight. The mind that stops questioning is already walking toward its own trap. This applies far beyond battlefields, to politics, systems, even personal decisions. 2. Adaptation is the deepest form of strength. Rome survived Cannae not because it was unbeatable, but because it was psychologically elastic. The Lombard cities at Legnano survived because they coordinated when survival demanded it. At Monte Cassino, victory came not from one decisive blow, but from sustained adjustment under pressure. Philosophically, this points to something profound. Strength is not rigidity. Strength is controlled flexibility. Civilizations, like individuals, rarely collapse at the moment of first failure. They collapse when they become incapable of changing course. 3. Control is often an illusion. Many commanders in Italy believed they were in control, right up until the moment everything unraveled. Romans at Cannae thought momentum guaranteed victory. Varus believed Germania was already pacified. Swiss pikemen trusted their historical dominance. Even modern planners at Monte Cassino underestimated terrain. The pattern is psychologically revealing. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty, so we create narratives of control, sometimes prematurely. Philosophical insight. The feeling of control and the reality of control are often dangerously different things. Italy's battlefields repeatedly expose this gap. 4. Systems matter more than moments. One of the most counterintuitive lessons is this. Hannibal won one of the most perfect battles in history and still lost the war. Rome lost catastrophically and still dominated the Mediterranean. Maxentius lost once, and his regime vanished. Philosophically, this reveals a harsh truth about history and life. Single moments rarely decide long-term outcomes. Systems do. Resilient systems absorb shock. Fragile systems shatter under it. This applies to empires, institutions, and even personal lives. 5. Human nature changes slowly, if at all. Perhaps the deepest lesson Italy offers is also the most uncomfortable. Across 2,000 years, the emotional patterns remain eerily consistent. Overconfidence before collapse, panic inside encirclement, hope placed in symbols, fear spreading faster than facts. Leaders believing this time is different. Weapons moved from short swords to artillery to aerial bombing, but the human nervous system did not evolve nearly as fast. Philosophical insight. History does not repeat because events are identical. It repeats because human reactions are. Italy is one of the clearest mirrors of this phenomenon. Final reflection, the quiet warning. If we listen carefully, Italy's battlefields are not just telling stories about the past. They are issuing a warning about the present. They remind us that confidence can become blindness, power can create fragility, victory can hide future defeat, and the greatest risks often appear precisely when everything seems stable, because the most dangerous moment in any system, military or civilian, is rarely the moment of obvious crisis. It is the moment of comfortable certainty. When we strip away the heroic stories and dramatic battlefield moments, a harder truth emerges. These battles did not happen randomly. They were not accidents of history. Each one grew from deeper pressures, political, economic, psychological, that had been building long before the first sword was drawn. If we want to understand what Italy truly teaches us, we must ask the most uncomfortable question. Why did these wars become inevitable? Across 2,000 years, the causes repeat with almost mechanical consistency. 1. Competition for strategic control. At the most visible level, many of these battles were about one thing: control of critical geography. Italy has always been a strategic prize because it sits at the center of Mediterranean power networks. Cannae and Zama leads to control of the Western Mediterranean. Teutoburg, indirectly, leads to Rome securing imperial frontiers. Milvian Bridge leads to control of the Roman imperial center. Legnano leads to control over wealthy northern Italian cities. Marignano to control of Milan and Italian trade routes. Monte Cassino to control of the road to Rome in World War II. This is the surface layer of causation, but geography alone does not start wars. It only makes them tempting. 2. Economic gravity, the hidden engine. Underneath almost every Italian conflict was economic pressure. Northern Italy especially was historically one of Europe's richest regions. Trade crossroads, banking centers, fertile agricultural zones, access to Mediterranean shipping lanes. Powerful states rarely ignore wealthy corridors sitting near their borders. Pattern: wealth concentrates to strategic interest, grows to political tension, rises to military confrontation, becomes more likely. From Carthage and Rome to France and the Holy Roman Empire to the Allies and Axis powers, the same gravitational pull kept drawing armies toward Italy. War often followed money, quietly, predictably, repeatedly. 3. Miscalculation and overconfidence. This is where the psychological layer becomes critical. Many of these battles were not inevitable in timing. They were accelerated by human misjudgment. Consider the pattern. Rome underestimated Hannibal before Cannae Varus, underestimated Arminius before Teutoburg. Maxentius misjudged Constantine before Milvian Bridge Barbarossa, underestimated city militias before Legnano Swiss commanders, overtrusted their shock tactics at Marignano Allied planners, underestimated terrain at Monte Cassino. In each case, the conflict existed, but disaster came from misreading the moment. Philosophical cause. Wars often begin from rivalry, but catastrophes begin from miscalculation. 4. Power transition tension. Many of these battles occurred during moments when the balance of power was shifting. This is extremely important. History shows wars become more likely when a rising power challenges an established one or when a system is internally unstable. Examples: Cannae/Zama to Rome versus rising Carthaginian challenge, Milvian Bridge to Roman civil power struggle, Legnano to cities rising against imperial control, Marignano to early modern state competition, Monte Cassino to global industrial powers colliding. Political scientists today call this power transition stress. Italy repeatedly became the arena where these tensions exploded. 5. Fear, the most underestimated cause. Perhaps the deepest and least visible driver is fear. Not always fear of defeat, but fear of future vulnerability. Rome feared Hannibal's long-term presence. Carthage feared Roman expansion. German tribes feared Roman absorption. Italian cities feared imperial domination. Modern powers feared strategic disadvantage in World War II. Many wars begin not because leaders feel strong, but because they fear what happens if they wait. Psychological law. Preventive fear often triggers offensive war. Italy's conflicts repeatedly show this mechanism at work. The unified cause pattern. When we compress everything into one clear model, the causes of these battles usually followed this chain. Step-by-step historical pattern. Strategic region gains economic value. Multiple powers become interested. Political tension rises. One side becomes overconfident or fearful. Miscalculation occurs. War becomes unavoidable. This pattern appears again and again across Italian history. Different centuries, same underlying pressures. If Italy teaches us anything about the causes of war, it is this. Wars rarely begin because people suddenly desire violence. They begin because systems drift into positions where leaders believe conflict is the least dangerous option left. And that is the most unsettling lesson of all, because it means many of history's bloodiest battles were not explosions of chaos, but the final step in a chain of very human decisions. When we imagine great battles, Cannae, Teutoburg, Monte Cassino, we often see maps, arrows, and formations, clean lines, clear movements, strategic clarity. But the battlefield from above and the battlefield from inside a soldier's mind are two completely different worlds, because war is not only fought with weapons, it is fought inside the human nervous system. And if we look philosophically, the psychology of soldiers in battle reveals some of the deepest truths about human nature under extreme pressure. 1. The collapse of the future. Before battle, a soldier lives in time. He thinks about tomorrow, about home, about survival after the war. But the moment battle begins, something profound happens. The future collapses into seconds. At Cannae, when Roman soldiers realized they were surrounded. At Teutoburg, when the forest attacks would not stop. At Monte Cassino, climbing under machine gun fire. The human brain shifts into survival compression. Philosophically, this is important. War forces the human mind into the most primitive form of existence, the immediate present. Long-term thinking disappears. Abstract ideals fade. Only the next breath matters. In this state, even highly trained soldiers become neurologically closer to ancient humans than modern citizens. 2. Fear is contagious, faster than orders. Military discipline tries to create order, but fear spreads faster than command. Across centuries in Italy, we see the same psychological chain reaction. One unit hesitates. Another notices formation cohesion weakens. Panic begins to ripple at Cannae. The physical encirclement created psychological suffocation. At Milvian Bridge, retreat turned into mass drowning. At Teutoburg, confusion destroyed Roman coordination long before total casualties did. Philosophically, this reveals something uncomfortable. Armies are not machines. They are emotional ecosystems. Even elite forces operate on fragile psychological equilibrium. 3. Training versus instinct, the inner conflict. Every soldier enters battle with two competing forces inside. Training, discipline, formation, obedience, versus instinct, run, hide, survive. Battle is the moment these two collide. Good armies do not eliminate fear. That is impossible. They delay the moment when instinct overrides training. This is why Roman legions held longer than most Swiss pikemen advanced with terrifying cohesion. German paratroopers at Monte Cassino fought stubbornly in ruins. But history shows, under enough pressure, instinct always pushes back. Philosophically, civilization trains the human body. Battle tests the ancient brain inside it. 4. The narrowing of moral space. Another profound psychological shift occurs in prolonged combat. Before battle, moral frameworks feel clear. During battle, they compress. At close quarters, especially in battles like Marignano or Monte Cassino, soldiers often enter what psychologists call moral tunnel vision. The brain prioritizes immediate threat unit survival obedience to command. Broader ethical reflection becomes neurologically suppressed. This is not necessarily cruelty, it is cognitive survival. Philosophical insight. Extreme environments do not always create monsters. They often create humans operating under radically narrowed awareness. Italy's battlefields repeatedly demonstrate this harsh truth. 5. Meaning as psychological armor. Perhaps the most powerful protective factor for soldiers has always been meaning. Across centuries, soldiers fought better when they believed they were defending something larger than themselves. Roman honor, tribal survival in Germania, religious destiny at Milvian Bridge, civic freedom at Legnano, national survival in World War II. Meaning does not remove fear, but it reorganizes it. Philosophically, the human organism tolerates extreme danger far better when suffering feels purposeful. This is why symbols, flags, and belief systems appear so consistently in warfare. They are not decorations. They are psychological stabilizers. Final reflection, the human constant. When we examine soldiers across 2,000 years of Italian battlefields, the most striking discovery is not how different they were. It is how similar. Different armor, different weapons, different languages, but inside the moment of maximum danger, the same human nervous system, the same surge of adrenaline, the same battle between fear and duty, the same fragile line between order and panic. And this may be the most philosophical truth of all. War is one of the few environments where modern humans briefly rediscover how ancient they still are. They begin because systems drift into positions where leaders believe conflict is the least dangerous option left. And that is the most unsettling lesson of all, because it means many of history's bloodiest battles were not explosions of chaos, but the final step in a chain of very human decisions. When history remembers great battles, Cannae, Zama, Teutoburg, Monte Cassino, it often speaks the names of commanders with a tone of cold certainty. Hannibal, Scipio, Arminius, Constantine, Barbarossa, Kesselring. From a distance they appear calm, calculated, almost mechanical. But this is one of history's greatest illusions, because while soldiers fight the visible battle, commanders fight the invisible one inside their own minds. 1. The loneliness of decision. On the battlefield, thousands move, but the most dangerous moment often happens in silence, when a commander must decide before certainty exists. Hannibal at Cannae, Scipio at Zama, Constantine before Milvian Bridge. Each faced the same philosophical burden. Act too early and you waste your advantage. Act too late and the moment is gone forever. This creates what we might call strategic loneliness, because no matter how many advisors stand nearby, the final decision is always solitary, and the mind under that pressure behaves very differently from the mind in safety. 2. Anxiety is not a weakness, it is constant. Popular mythology portrays great commanders as fearless. History suggests something far more human. Even the greatest leaders operated under continuous uncertainty. Incomplete intelligence, delayed communication, unpredictable terrain, fragile troop morale, and the ever-present risk of irreversible failure. At Teutoburg, Varus likely did not feel calm. He felt increasingly uneasy as cohesion slipped. At Monte Cassino, Allied planners faced mounting frustration as each assault stalled. At Legnano, Barbarossa's confidence turned to shock when momentum failed. Philosophical truth: high command does not eliminate anxiety, it institutionalizes it. Great commanders are not calm because danger is absent. They are calm because they have learned to function while anxious. 3. The burden of irreversibility. For ordinary soldiers, mistakes are often local. For commanders, mistakes become historical. This creates a unique psychological weight, the awareness that one decision can kill thousands. At Cannae, Roman commanders committed fully to mass assault and could not reverse once the trap began closing. At Milvian Bridge, Maxentius's choice to leave Rome's walls proved fatal. At Monte Cassino, the decision to bomb the abbey remains debated decades later. Commanders operate under what philosophers might call irreversible time pressure once certain orders are given. History moves forward without mercy. 4. The performance of confidence. Here lies one of the most psychologically complex aspects of command. Even when uncertain internally, commanders must project certainty externally, because soldiers read emotional signals instantly. If hesitation appears at the top, morale weakens, rumors spread, cohesion cracks. This forced confidence creates an internal split, outer certainty versus inner doubt. The greatest commanders in Italy understood this performance requirement. Hannibal maintained composure even while executing a high-risk double envelopment. Scipio projected control while adapting Roman doctrine. German defenders at Monte Cassino maintained discipline under relentless pressure. Philosophical insight: leadership in war is partly strategic and partly theatrical, not deception, but emotional regulation under extreme observation. 5. The commander's greatest fear. It is tempting to think commanders fear death most. History suggests otherwise. The deeper fear is often loss of control over unfolding events. Because battle is inherently chaotic, no commander ever truly controls. Weather, terrain, friction, individual panic timing breakdowns, enemy improvisation. The best leaders in Italy's battles did not eliminate chaos. They anticipated it. Hannibal built flexibility into his formation. Scipio built lanes for elephant disruption. Kesselring built layered defenses across terrain. Philosophical law of command. The illusion of perfect control destroys leaders. Intelligent leaders design for disorder. Final reflection, the human at the top. When we look at Italy's greatest battles through a philosophical lens, something deeply human appears. Commanders were not chess players moving emotionless pieces. They were human nervous systems under unimaginable pressure. Behind every famous battlefield maneuver was uncertainty time, pressure, incomplete knowledge, and the quiet awareness that history was watching. This may be the most important psychological truth of command. The higher the command, the heavier the invisible weight. And perhaps this is why Italy's battlefields still, they begin because systems drift into positions where leaders believe conflict is the least dangerous option left. And that is the most unsettling lesson of all, because it means many of history's bloodiest battles were not explosions of chaos, but the final step in a chain of very human decisions. Across the long arc of history, Italy has witnessed more than battles. It has witnessed patterns, repeated, refined, and relearned in blood. From the suffocating encirclement at Cannae to the disciplined reversal at Zama, from the forest nightmare of Teutoburg to the faith-charged turning point at the Milvian Bridge, from the civic defiance at Legnano to the brutal transition at Marignano, and finally to the grinding modern struggle at Monte Cassino. The weapons changed, but the human story did not. Again and again, armies marched forward believing they understood the moment. Again and again, commanders made decisions under the crushing weight of uncertainty. Again and again, soldiers stood in that ancient space between fear and duty. And Italy, silent, patient, unmoving, kept revealing the same quiet truth. Victory is never permanent, control is never absolute, and certainty is often the first step toward collapse. If there is one lesson that echoes across these battlefields, it is this. History is not just a record of what happened. It is a mirror of how humans behave when pressure becomes unbearable. The same overconfidence, the same hesitation, the same desperate adaptations, the same fragile line between order and chaos. 2,000 years apart, yet psychologically familiar. So when we study the great battles of Italy, we are not just looking backward, we are looking inward. Because the forces that shaped those battlefields, ambition, fear, pride, resilience, are not buried in the past. They are still active, still human, still with us. In a world overflowing with fast information and shallow summaries, the enigmatic veil was created for a different purpose, not just to tell history, but to decode it. Because history is not only a sequence of dates and battles, it is the laboratory of human behavior, the place where power, fear, ambition, obedience, and resilience reveal their true forms. Most content stops at what happened. We ask a deeper question: why did humans behave the way they did? And more importantly, are we still repeating those same patterns today? What viewers gain from this channel? On this channel, every video is designed to give you more than information. You gain deeper historical understanding, sharper psychological awareness pattern, recognition across centuries, critical thinking about power and systems, and a more realistic view of human nature. Because when you understand the patterns behind history, you begin to see the present more clearly. Battles stop being distant stories, empires stop being abstract names, and human behavior starts to make uncomfortable but valuable sense. Why this matters in the modern world today: information is faster than ever. but understanding is often thinner than ever. We live in a time where systems still overestimate their stability, leaders still miscalculate under pressure, societies still repeat old psychological mistakes, and individuals still struggle between comfort and truth. That is why the enigmatic veil focuses not just on events, but on mechanisms, because the past is not dead. It is quietly instructing anyone willing to look closely. Our mission. Our mission is simple but serious, to help viewers see history not as entertainment alone, but as a tool for awareness. If even one viewer finishes a video and begins to notice patterns more clearly, if even one person becomes harder to manipulate by shallow narratives, if even one mind becomes more historically and psychologically awake, then the channel has already succeeded. Join the journey. If you are tired of surface-level history, if you are drawn to the deeper psychology behind power, war, and human behavior, if you want history that sharpens the mind, not just fills time, subscribe to the Enigmatic Veil, because here, history is not just remembered, it is understood. When history remembers great battles, Cannae, Zama, Teutoburg, Monte Cassino, it often speaks the names of commanders with a tone of cold certainty. Hannibal, Scipio, Arminius, Constantine, Barbarossa, Kesselring. From a distance they appear calm, calculated, almost mechanical. But this is one of history's greatest illusions, because while soldiers fight the visible battle, commanders fight the invisible one inside their own minds. 1. The loneliness of decision. On the battlefield, thousands move, but the most dangerous moment often happens in silence, when a commander must decide before certainty exists. Hannibal at Cannae, Scipio at Zama, Constantine before Milvian Bridge. Each faced the same philosophical burden. Act too early and you waste your advantage. Act too late and the moment is gone forever. This creates what we might call strategic loneliness, because no matter how many advisors stand nearby, the final decision is always solitary, and the mind under that pressure behaves very differently from the mind in safety. 2. Anxiety is not a weakness, it is constant. Popular mythology portrays great commanders as fearless. History suggests something far more human. Even the greatest leaders operated under continuous uncertainty. Incomplete intelligence, delayed communication, unpredictable terrain, fragile troop morale, and the ever-present risk of irreversible failure. At Teutoburg, Varus likely did not feel calm. He felt increasingly uneasy as cohesion slipped. At Monte Cassino, Allied planners faced mounting frustration as each assault stalled. At Legnano, Barbarossa's confidence turned to shock when momentum failed. Philosophical truth: high command does not eliminate anxiety, it institutionalizes it. Great commanders are not calm because danger is absent. They are calm because they have learned to function while anxious. 3. The burden of irreversibility. For ordinary soldiers, mistakes are often local. For commanders, mistakes become historical. This creates a unique psychological weight, the awareness that one decision can kill thousands. At Cannae, Roman commanders committed fully to mass assault and could not reverse once the trap began closing. At Milvian Bridge, Maxentius's choice to leave Rome's walls proved fatal. At Monte Cassino, the decision to bomb the abbey remains debated decades later. Commanders operate under what philosophers might call irreversible time pressure. Once certain orders are given, history moves forward without mercy. 4. The performance of confidence. Here lies one of the most psychologically complex aspects of command. Even when uncertain internally, commanders must project certainty externally, because soldiers read emotional signals instantly. If hesitation appears at the top, morale weakens, rumors spread, cohesion cracks. This forced confidence creates an internal split, outer certainty versus inner doubt. The greatest commanders in Italy understood this performance requirement. Hannibal maintained composure even while executing a high-risk double envelopment. Scipio projected control while adapting Roman doctrine. German defenders at Monte Cassino maintained discipline under relentless pressure. Philosophical insight. Leadership in war is partly strategic and partly theatrical, not deception, but emotional regulation under extreme observation. 5. The commander's greatest fear. It is tempting to think commanders fear death most. History suggests otherwise. The deeper fear is often loss of control over unfolding events. Because battle is inherently chaotic, no commander ever truly controls. Weather, terrain, friction, individual panic timing, breakdowns, enemy improvisation. The best leaders in Italy's battles did not eliminate chaos. They anticipated it. Hannibal built flexibility into his formation. Scipio built lanes for elephant disruption. Kesselring built layered defenses across terrain. Philosophical law of command. The illusion of perfect control destroys leaders. Intelligent leaders design for disorder. Final reflection, the human at the top. When we look at Italy's greatest battles through a philosophical lens, something deeply human appears. Commanders were not chess players moving emotionless pieces. They were human nervous systems under unimaginable pressure. Behind every famous battlefield maneuver was uncertainty time, pressure, incomplete knowledge, and the quiet awareness that history was watching. This may be the most important psychological truth of command. The higher the command, the heavier the invisible weight. And perhaps this is why Italy's battlefields still. They begin because systems drift into positions where leaders believe conflict is the least dangerous option left. And that is the most unsettling lesson of all, because it means many of history's bloodiest battles were not explosions of chaos, but the final step in a chain of very human decisions. Across the long arc of history, Italy has witnessed more than battles. It has witnessed patterns, repeated, refined, and relearned in blood. From the suffocating encirclement at Cannae to the disciplined reversal at Zama. From the forest nightmare of Teutoburg to the faith-charged turning point at the Milvian Bridge. From the civic defiance at Legnano to the brutal transition at Marignano. And finally, to the grinding modern struggle at Monte Cassino. The weapons changed, but the human story did not. Again and again, armies marched forward believing they understood the moment. Again and again, commanders made decisions under the crushing weight of uncertainty. Again and again, soldiers stood in that ancient space between fear and duty. And Italy, silent, patient, unmoving, kept revealing the same quiet truth. Victory is never permanent, control is never absolute, and certainty is often the first step toward collapse. If there is one lesson that echoes across these battlefields, it is this. History is not just a record of what happened. It is a mirror of how humans behave when pressure becomes unbearable. The same overconfidence, the same hesitation, the same desperate adaptations, the same fragile line between order and chaos. 2,000 years apart, yet psychologically familiar. So when we study the great battles of Italy, we are not just looking backward, we are looking inward. Because the forces that shaped those battlefields, ambition, fear, pride, resilience, are not buried in the past. They are still active, still human, still with us. In a world overflowing with fast information and shallow summaries, the enigmatic veil was created for a different purpose, not just to tell history, but to decode it. Because history is not only a sequence of dates and battles, it is the laboratory of human behavior, the place where power, fear, ambition, obedience, and resilience reveal their true forms. Most content stops at what happened. We ask a deeper question: why did humans behave the way they did? And more importantly, are we still repeating those same patterns today? What viewers gain from this channel. On this channel, every video is designed to give you more than information. You gain deeper historical understanding, sharper psychological awareness pattern, recognition across centuries, critical thinking about power and systems, and a more realistic view of human nature. Because when you understand the patterns behind history, you begin to see the present more clearly. Battles stop being distant stories, empires stop being abstract names, and human behavior starts to make uncomfortable but valuable sense. Why this matters in the modern world today: information is faster than ever, but understanding is often thinner than ever. We live in a time where systems still overestimate their stability, leaders still miscalculate under pressure, societies still repeat old psychological mistakes, and individuals still struggle between comfort and truth. That is why the enigmatic veil focuses not just on events, but on mechanisms, because the past is not dead. It is quietly instructing anyone willing to look closely. Our mission is simple but serious: to help viewers see history not as entertainment alone, but as a tool for awareness. If even one viewer finishes a video and begins to notice patterns more clearly, if even one person becomes harder to manipulate by shallow narratives, if even one mind becomes more historically and psychologically awake, then the channel has already succeeded. Join the journey. If you are tired of surface-level history, if you are drawn to the deeper psychology behind power, war, and human behavior, if you want history that sharpens the mind, not just fills time, subscribe to the Enigmatic Veil, because here, history is not just remembered, it is understood.